Is the word Passover a misnomer, a wrong translation? Have we gotten it wrong for all these years, all the English speakers? Should we go on missions throughout various supermarkets in a few months, ripping down the Passover sections because it is inaptly named Passover? Is there a fatal error that haunts Jews across the world when they call it Passover? The answer is, of course, yes, and of course, no. So don't worry. So let's start from the beginning. There is a pasuk in Parashat Bo that describes Yitzias Mitzrayim, the night of Yitzias Mitzrayim, Makas Becharos, which sits at the heart of the controversy. And by the way, everything I'm saying now is not my own. It's not my own chiddush. It may sound innovative and novel to you, but it has already been discussed extensively, not just in the recent memory by Rav Ben Nun, but of course by many, many people beforehand. But it's something which isn't well known, and it does, of course, create a change, not just on how we view Pesach, which is why I'm not speaking about it on Pesach, but on Parashat Bo in the middle of January, middle of Teves. V'yavar Hashem lingofes Mitzrayim. This is Perek Yud Beis Pasach of Gimel. V'ras Adam ala mashkof el shtei mezuzos. Hashem will see the blood. Ufasach Hashem ala Pesach. And I'm interpreting the word Pasach, Pei Samaches, ala Pesach. Pesach Pei Safches is the door. Hashem will pass over the door. V'lo yitein hamashchis levo el batechem lingof. And he will not allow the Malach HaMavis to enter the Jewish homes that he has passed over. That's very awkward. If Hashem has already passed over the Jewish home by seeing the blood and moved on to the non-Jewish home, so he and the Malach HaMavis presumably are traveling together, and Hashem has made the decision to pass to the next home, and the Malach HaMavis, of course, is only entering the Egyptian home. It's a little bit repetitious, and that question has been asked and answered in other ways, in technical ways, but it's a clumsy pasuk. I'll read it again. Hashem will see the blood. By the way, we'll get to this a little bit later. Why does Hashem why does he need to see the blood? Which is a theological question, but a literary question also. Theologically, does Hashem need to see the blood? The answer is no. Hashem could be mavchin es chazal say bin tipa letipa bin bechor le'enu bechor Mitzrayim. That night, Hashem was very, very careful and deliberate, discriminating between who is an Egyptian bechor and who wasn't. He didn't have any external markers. People weren't wearing bechor in their foreheads. So Hashem can distinguish between two different boys sitting at an Egyptian table. Hashem can distinguish between a Jewish home and a non-Jewish home. But we'll leave that for later. We'll get to it, B'ezrat Hashem. But Pasach Hashem ala Pesach, Hashem will skip over Passover, the Jewish home, Jewish door. And he won't allow the Malach HaMavis, the destroyer, to enter the Jewish home to cause harm, to kill. So from this pasuk, it is apparent that the word Pesach has additional meanings, and has at least two additional meanings, and I'll mention one, I'll allude to the other. And by the way, it's already latent in Rashi. I don't have the Rashi in front of me, but Rashi does discuss the second meaning. And I'll quote the Mechilta, who quotes the second meaning. Pesach doesn't literally mean to skip over. Pesach literally means to hover over, to remain in a particular location and remain there hovering. When Eliyahu accuses the Nevei Habal of hypocrisy, that they want to worship pagan gods, but they also want to be on the side of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eliyahu says in Melachim Aleph Perek Yudches, Pasuk Chav Aleph, Ad Matai, famous Pasuk, Ad Matai, Atem Posachim al Shenei HaSeipim. Eliyahu is not saying they're Poschim, that they're passing over. They're not passing over anything. Halavai, they should pass over the side of Nevei Habal. He is worried that they are, as we would say, tansing ar shtei chasanas, dancing at two weddings. They're hovering. Let's say there's a fence dividing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Nevi'im, Avodas Hashem, Beis HaMikdash, and Nevei Habal, and they want to be on both sides of the equation. Ad matai atem posachim al shnei haseipim. You want to be on both sides of the equation in our terminology. The word Pesach, Pe Samach Ches, means to hover. Why does it mean to hover? It comes from the same root as a piseach, someone who unfortunately is lame. And unfortunately, we are struggling in Eretz Yisrael for so many people to recover their ability to walk. And when we say, Be'ezras Hashem, Baruch Hashem, L'kina Melech HaMasher Hechin, Mitzadei Gaver, please, Open your imagination, open your hearts, open your mind, and think about all the soldiers who are working day and night just to take those first steps that you may be taking naturally and automatically and almost subconscious, not subconsciously, but without thought, unintentionally, because walking is the most natural human movement. That's why it's called hergel and regel, because we move our feet without thinking. But for so many people, it's not that easy. And a piseach, someone who is lame, I'll actually model it if I can. When they walk, now you can't see me because you see my body, they walk very slowly and they appear to be standing in place even though they're moving. So a piseach is someone that we associate with remaining in place even though they may be moving. So piseach is a person, it's a noun, and it also describes a phenomena that we see in a piseach, which doesn't have to apply to a person, it could be just hovering. And hence, and Rashi says this, hence, the word piseach doesn't mean Hashem skipped over the houses of the Jewish people. Hashem hovered over the Jewish home. And I'll show you where Chazal say this in a moment. And once Hashem was Pasach ala Pesach, he hovered over the Jewish home, so who couldn't get in? Lo yitena mashchis levo b'techem l'ngof, because Hashem was hovering as a shelter, as an iron dome above Jewish homes. So as a consequence, the mashchis could not enter. Ufasach Hashem al haPesach, Hashem hovered over Jewish homes. V'lo yitena mashchis levo el b'techem l'ngof, preventing the mashchis from entering. Said otherwise, Pesach takes two meanings. Its most literal etymological meaning is to hover. And the mechanics of that night were hovering. Namely, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hovered over the Jewish home, Ufasach Hashem ala Pesach, and as a consequence, so at 12 o'clock at midnight, the word Pesach, mechanically, the mechanics, the logistics of the evening were hovering. Then you woke up the next morning and you looked and you saw death, 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 no death, 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 death. Egyptians' homes were bloody with death and Jewish homes were not. And it had the appearance of having skipped over. So the phenomena, not the mechanics of the phenomena, but the experience of the phenomena to the person witnessing, I'm saying not necessarily at 6 in the morning, could have been at night also, you witness as if the death that had afflicted the Egyptians had skipped over the Jewish homes. So Pesach means both. It means something else also, but I won't get into the third meaning. But Pesach means two things at least. It means hovering over, and it also means passing over as a consequence of the hovering over and not allowing the Satan or the Malach HaMavis, to enter. So don't worry, you don't have to change Passover, but just understand that its other meaning, its more literal etymological meaning is not Passover, but hover over. So if you want to rename the Yom Tov hover over, it's certainly not as mellifluous and doesn't roll off the tongue as much as Passover, hover over, too many overs, but you can't distort etymology simply because it's more fluid to the tongue. The question is, seriously, why does all this matter? Who cares? Not who cares, but what does this teach us more deeply? The answer is as follows, and I'll slowly build to the crescendo, to the culmination of what this all means. Remember I mentioned a few minutes ago about the blood, and why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to see the blood, and Baruch Shalom knows. And the answer is, the blood is not just the blood to identify Jewish homes for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it doesn't need any blood to identify Jewish homes. The blood is the blood of a korban. If we want HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence to hover over a Jewish home, well, how do we draw Hashem's presence down? We bring a korban. That's how you bring Hashem's presence into this world. That's how you ignite Gilei Shechina. So the blood is the blood of a korban, and it's the blood that has to be placed on the mizbeach as part of a korban. And the problem is there's no mizbeach, so we have to have a stand-in for the mizbeach. And I'm quoting the Gemara Psachim and Daf Tzadik Vav, quoting Rabbi Yosef, who was blind. But sometimes when your external eye doesn't work, your inner eye is more sensitive. Shlosha mizbechos hayusham. There were 3 mizbechos in Mitzrayim. Al hamashkof, v'al shtehem mezuzos. V'su lo midi achvine, v'su midi achvine lahavi. Placing blood on the doorpost was not to signify this is a Jewish home for Hashem. Oh, Jewish home, better skip over this one. Placing blood on Jewish homes was the Hazas Hadam ceremony, which is vital and central to a korban. And that's why the dam was placed on the inside, not the outside. And here's a great line, and I'll get to this, I'll elaborate in a few moments, but the first Mizbeach in Jewish history was the Jewish family. And for a religion that steadfastly refuses to dichotomize family life from holiness, from Kedusha, from sanctity, sees sanctity within the Jewish home. Az chilalta, I'm still hearing Parshas Vayechi in my ears where Yaakov is critical of Reuven. Az chilalta yitzui Allah, you are machalel, my bed. Whatever Reuven's sin was, whether it was actual or just rearranging Yaakov's marital schedule, demanding. What do you mean yichalel yitzui Allah? Az bitalta, az pagata, az chilalta sounds like you were machalel kedusha, and Chazal say that there's kedusha in Yaakov's bed, and Reuven by kedusha in Yaakov's bed, kedusha in the Beis Medrash, kedusha in taking a lulav and esrog, kedusha and kedusha is ever present and it permeates every part, and we stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every single moment of our day and our life. And the word chilo, which is typically associated with kedusha, is applied to Yaakov's bed and the encroachment of Yaakov's bed by Reuven. So the first Mizbeach was a family, just parents and kids sitting around. I promise you they weren't singing Chad Gadya. It didn't exist yet. They weren't singing Arba Koshios, the Fir Kashis. They weren't giving any brisker lumdus about, I don't know, whether a seba is part of the Ma'aseh Shtia or not part of the Ma'aseh Shtia, and Taisvus, and whether it's Ma'akev or not. And it was just Jewish families sitting, singing, celebrating, enjoying each other's company. You have to break this habit to dichotomize religion into sacred and mundane. There are different components, different tonalities, but can you feel Kedusha at every step of the way? It's a prayer. Don't worry, I'm not pontificating. I struggle with it also. But how can you bring Kedusha into your family life, which I think in 2025 is the challenge of the day, challenge of the generation, because family lives are so eviscerated by loss of traditional family values and of course the role of screens and directing our attention away from each other and towards the screens. And so Pesach means Hashem hovered over the homes. To get Hashem to hover over the homes, we brought a korban. The korban was the korban Pesach, and the dam was applied to the door. And now I'll read that pasuk again. Ve'avar Hashem lin gofes Mitzrayim v'ra'a es hadam al hamashkof yal shtei mezuzot. So we'll see the blood like he sees every korban. Ufasach Hashem al Pesach, he'll hover over the door. V'leitena mashlitzav avatechem and gof, and that will provide cover, preventing the Malach HaMavis from entering the Jewish abode. What does this all mean in the grand picture? So, of course, we return to the great Ohev Yisrael, the author of the Zohar, or at least of the material of the Zohar, and the entire Masara of the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who never lost an opportunity to express his Avas Yisrael. The first Giloi Shechina in history, at a mass level. First Giloi Shechina occurs in Parshas Vayera to Avram. Vayera Avram el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov. Vayera Avram, excuse me, because until a person has bris milah, there can be no Giloi Shechina, and until you are tamim, you can't be salech lefanai. One of the three mitzvahs that a person without milah, legitimately without milah, because medical reasons can't perform, he can't enter the base of mikdash, you can't be amud l'fnei Hashem. But the first Giloi Shechina to a nation was not at Har Sinai, as we would think. That was the first conversation. The first Giloi Shechina occurred in Mitzrayim, in the place you would least expect it to occur, in the cesspool of blood and the garbage house of underworld black magic that Egypt was. It was a stinking, stupefying den of black magic and witchcraft and death and ugliness. It was vulgar. So why does Hashem choose that as the first location to appear to his people? Amar Rabbi Shimon, the Medrash Rabbah, Perak Tesvav, Perak Hey. Gedol chibasan shel Yisrael, because Hashem loves us so much. Shenigla Kadosh Baruch Hu b'makam avadas kochavim, b'makam tinofes, b'makam tuma. Some of you may know this word, but if you don't, it's a great Yiddish word. You got to know a little Yiddish. You can't be a good Yid unless you know some Yiddish. How do you say idol in Yiddish? You know, it's called getchke. Place of getchke. Talk about onomatopoeia. Talk about a word that sounds ugly. Getchke. It's not a very elegant word. Can't imagine wishing someone, naming someone happy birthday, getchke. It sounds ugly. It sounds like you're gonna get him. So Hashem revealed himself in Makom Avodas Kochavim, Makom Tinofes, Makom Tuma, Bishvil Lagolan, and the Medrash Rabbi Shimon evokes, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is a Kohen whose Truma falls into the Beis HaKvaros, into the cemetery, and he can't really enter because it'll contaminate him, and on the other hand, he loves the Truma so much, and what should I do? And the Kohen decides, I'd rather be Metame myself and save my Truma. And the mashal is a very, very provocative mashal. Kivayachal Hashem was Metame himself to reveal, to snatch us from Mitzrayim, and not just snatch us from above, but to descend kachatzos alayla ani yared b'soch Mitzrayim, and he's Metame himself. So the question which the Medrash begs, which I'm not going to discuss, is who is Mitara Kadosh Baruch Hu? But that's already a very provocative question. So seeing Pesach that way accentuates this is a night of Gilui Shechina. It's not just the mechanics of how we were saved. It's a whole different narrative to the night of Pesach. It's not just a night of punitive action from which the Jewish people are spared. It's a night of Gilui Shechina on the side and the overlay. We are spared through the Gilui Shechina. They're not two separate events, and nothing is separate when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Geula. So it adds a layer, and you say this every year, but the problem is we're so rushed in the night of Pesach, and we spend so much time disproportionately in the beginning, in the Fir Kashas, and the Karpas, and the Lachmanya, that when we get to the meat of the Haggadah, which is Seir Lamad, which we darshan in the Psukim of Parshas Kisava, we actually unfold the various layers of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're not always paying attention. We're reading it very quickly. Remember that pasuk? We say the first pasuk, or the fourth pasuk. V'yitzei Hashem Elokeinu misham, b'yad chazaka v'zor netuv v'mar gadol v'osos v'movsim. And Chazal translate and explicate and elaborate and amplify each of those phrases. B'yad chazaka v'zor netuv v'mar gadol v'osos v'movsim. How do Chazal interpret Mora Gadol? You say it, but you say so quickly. Uve Mora Gadol. What does that God to say? A second, pregnant pause. Over Mora Gadol, Zu Gilui Shechina. The phrase Mora Gadol in Parashas Ki Tavo refers to the Gilui Shechina of the evening. How does it refer to Gilui Shechina? There's a cross-reference to a pasuk in Veschanan, which makes it sound like the phrase Mora Gadol is associated with Gilui Shechina. So it's not just an etymological, intriguing story how Pesach became Passover as opposed to Haver over, what it really means, and how you answer the question of Pesach Hashem ala Pesach v'lo yitenem hashchis avo b'techem l'ngof. It strikes at the heart of the experience that night of Mitzrayim. It broke the will of the Egyptians, delivered us from Mitzrayim, from slavery, Beis Avadim, pulverized the Egyptians, B'nai B'char Yisrael, as he had telegraphed in Parashat Shemos, and if you don't release my child, I'll take your child. But within all this, and at the heart of all this, is the first Gilui Shechina and the choice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to descend into history for the first time at a mass level and to create Gilui Shechina amidst all this dirt and schmutz, another good Yiddish word, and all this death and blood and magic and black magic and paganism, is the greatest testament to his love for us and is a comforting message. Where you are, I am. It could be Mitzrayim, it could be Bavel and chains, it could be Rome building the Colosseum and being fed to the lions, it could be suffering through the Crusades, or the Khmelnytsky Rebellion, or blood libels, or Tsarist Russia anti-Semitism, or in Auschwitz, or in more comfortable times, which hopefully will remain comfortable in New York, or LA, or Melbourne, or Edgware. Where you are, I are. Of course, the saturation and concentration of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is only in Eretz Yisrael, Lifnei Hashem. That's an entirely different experience. Lifnei Hashem, Tamid Hashem, Elokech Haba Merishis Hashanah. But Hashem is Megal himself to the Jews, where you are. That's what love is. You go to the place that your person you love and care for needs you to be. I'm sure some of you have been following my own past couple of months. Where the people you care about are is where you are. That's your makom. Shabbat shalom.